we'll begin with the Mega Tomb Raider. So this presentation is going to be a debrief about the book, about myself, and where I feel game preservation is as well. So, again, if you don't already know, my name's Daryl Baxter. My Twitter and Mastodon handles are all there. And currently, I am the features editor at iMore at Future Publishing. So it's a website where they cover all about Apple. And there is me on the front page demoing the first impressions of the red nose from Johnny Ive. So we went from an iPod to the iMac to a red nose. And previous to this, I was at Tech Radar, same company at Future, where I was the software and downloads writer. And before that, I was also just freelancing around as well. So, like I say, this is going to be a past, present, and future of this presentation. So we're going to get into the past of myself, and then we're going to get into the book. So we begin in 1994. That is me. There is actual proof of me playing Sonic the Hedgehog 3 for the first time on December 5th, 1994. And this kind of started the whole thing for me of gaming. Before this, I was playing Alex Kidd on a Master System, the kind of consoles that didn't have a cartridge inside. You'd switch it on and Alex Kidd would be there straight away. You'd probably get killed by that frog boss, which looks so creepy still, 20 odd years on. And yeah, so Sonic 3 just kind of blew my mind, because not only did it kind of like show, like, say, the music and the level design, but it also shows something called cutscenes as well. It began like the game, where you would have Sonic and Tails like on this plane going to the floating islands, and it was amazing to me. And ever since then, I just had this feeling that gaming was kind of like a path I wanted to go down. So we fast forward a few years, and we get to 1997. And after a few years of having a Mega Drive and also getting Sonic and Knuckles and completing the story with Sonic 3, I get a PlayStation 1 in July of 97. And again, this blew my mind even more, because for the last few years I was playing 2D platforming games and RPGs. And here it was, a PlayStation console. And it also came with Demo 1. Does anyone remember Demo 1 with the PlayStation console? Yeah, so it was a collection of playable demos and videos, and also this iconic, I say iconic, technical demo of a T-Rex and a manta ray as well, which you could like view around and zoom and everything. But it also had a demo of the first Tomb Raider game. And I remember this as clear as day. It was a second level, and it was where you would come across a bear, and it terrified me. At 8 years old, a bear terrified me on PlayStation 1 graphics. But again, it blew my mind because it was a fully 3D world. It wasn't just going from left to right or hitting the checkpoints. You could go within the confines of a level anywhere you wanted, and you could even swim as well, which is a strange thing for me. But of course, you fast forward a few months to Christmas 97, Spice Girls are at the top of their game, and of course, Tomb Raider 2 is there in my Santa sack with Pandemonium 2 and Crash Bandicoot 2 as well. And this was something that I kind of discovered through the magazines of the time. So we had Games Master magazine. My grandma had gifted me a Games Master magazine issue, and it hinted towards Tomb Raider 2. And it had abilities like Laura could climb now, and she could wear different costumes, and she could travel to different places in the world. And of course, she could drive different vehicles too, which we'll get into in a second. So 2012, we fast forward a fair bit. So I'm doing a computer systems networks degree at Nottingham Trent, and it's a fine degree. It's going to my interest of computing, but something happened the first few weeks of my second year. So there was a student magazine, and they were just sending an email, a uni-wide email to people saying, we've got this magazine, we have some budget for a printed edition to send around the campuses. Would anyone be interested? I really hadn't written anything before in my life, apart from maybe a few Facebook statuses or Vivos. But I thought, you know what, let's just go for it and see what happens. And of course, I put an idea in about writing up Tomb Raider 2, my favourite Tomb Raider game of the series. And after like a few back and forths, it gets published in this magazine. Now, I will say, if you somehow come across this, the final section has been cut out because it was only, they could only fit this on one page, not two. So it does have a sudden end. However, there was one time where I was going to the computer study rooms, and I found one of the magazines, and I opened the magazine up, and there it was. And that picture was taken just when I first saw it at the end of 2012, and it just blew my mind. And you've probably heard about, like, from podcasts or watched different YouTubes where someone goes on about how they had a light bulb moment, they realized it's what they want to do with their lives. I'm here to tell you that does happen, and it's true, and that happened to me. And as soon as I did that, I just really wanted to kind of almost sack the degree and go full-time writing, but I couldn't at the time. I had a degree to finish. But it led me to keep working with the magazine and keep writing articles and also reaching out to interviews. So, for instance, Ed McMillan, he was partly creator of Super Meat Boy. I managed to interview him, and also it led to Nathan McCree. So Nathan McCree is the composer of the original first 3 Tomb Raider games. And this was interesting how this happened, because even in 2013, there wasn't really like a community online for Tomb Raider. There wasn't really any major sites. There are a few fan sites, don't get me wrong, but like compared to today's like modern day, you couldn't really go on to say Twitter or Facebook page and look at the original developers and see what they were talking about or any kind of topics as well. Nathan didn't have a Twitter, he didn't have a homepage at all, he didn't have a Facebook page either. And I reached out to him through a Facebook friend request and hoped to God that he replied, and he did. And it turned out that we were just talking over Skype. And again, it was a surreal thing because I got to ask him some questions that he probably hadn't been asked before. Certain questions like, why didn't he work on the 4th Tomb Raider game? What's his thoughts about the latest trilogy? Is he tempted to come back to the series? All these questions that were coming through my mind. Even questions like any songs that had been cut out from the first few games as well. And I asked him all about this, and it was amazing. And ever since then, we became friends, and he actually kind of led into doing what's called the Tomb Raider Suite. So he was able to go to the Hammersmith Apollo and just had this full orchestra playing his whole soundtrack of the first 3 games, and it was incredible. But yeah, that was just an example really of just how my contact with talking with the original team began. But it also kind of sparked something in me. So it kind of made me feel like, well, after talking to Nathan and about a few things, it kind of made me wonder really, could there be a book? Now, we've all probably come across certain gaming websites, perhaps, or magazines where they just have maybe 1,000 word features, 2 or 3 pages of a feature, of a retrospective of certain series, and that's it. But I always kind of thought, after talking with Nathan and a few people who were involved in the original development, that there could be something more than a feature, there could be something there. So that was the first spark of what could become Making a Tomb Raider. But of course, life gets in the way, and I was in an IT job for a few years, and I then moved from Lincoln to Manchester in an early midlife crisis, doing full-time IT work. I thought it was my calling. After 3 months, it certainly wasn't, and I ended up being very, very bored by it. And after a couple of years, I decided, after a chat with my then girlfriend, now wife, that I just wanted to go for it. Writing was something I really wanted to do, but the book was in the back of my mind. So during this time, between 2018 and 2020, it kind of led to a few things. So it was reviewing the Resident Evil 3 remake. It was also retrospectives on Sonic as well. There's also a VGC, where I talked about when Banjo-Kazooie first appeared in Smash Brothers and blew everyone's minds back in the day. And also a few things like Life on Mars. So that was another interest of mine, where there was something called watch-alongs in the pandemic. Feels almost surreal kind of thinking back to the pandemic and how there were a lot of watch-alongs, it seems. There would be Doctor Who watch-alongs, Life on Mars. And Matthew Graham, one of the co-creators of the series, he was doing a watch-along, and he hinted that he was working on a sequel to Life on Mars and Ashes to Ashes. And this led to me just kind of messaging him and then calling him over WhatsApp, and it led to this interview. So the freelancing never really went away regardless. I mean, even though it was very difficult in some years, I just knew this is what I wanted to do. And I loved it. I absolutely love it, and I still do. So we fast forward a bit and we go to the present. So there's the front cover and there's the book there showing it as well. So there were 3 turning points that happened between 2018 and to the pandemic of from February 2020. 3 turning points. So these were the Oasis Supersonic documentary, the Sonic prototypes, and which I've hinted before, the great story of the original team. So, the first point, Supersonic. Now, fantastic documentary if you haven't seen it. I first saw this in 2016, and this charts the birth of Oasis, the rise of it, and it stops in '96 when they headlined their famous Nebworth concert. Incredible time. But it also kind of like sparks something here as to how it could be the format of the book. So if you've seen it, there's never really kind of Noel Gallagher sitting down face to face with someone and being asked questions about this documentary, and him like just talking about his history. In fact, both of these are the narrators, and other people who were involved in Oasis and everything else were also background narrators. Anything that you watched, it was footage from the time. It was adverts, it was interviews, it was making of the two albums, and it had the music and everything there. And I also thought that it was a fantastic little ending, because they could have ended it on a low point with the Be Here Now album, the third album, in '97, where it was hyped up so much and it disappointed so many, but instead it ended at Nebworth to end on a high, and I thought that was really interesting. So it was all these points to me that made me feel like, well, that could be a great template to follow really for this book, for Tomb Raider, because I wanted to be a story about the original team who were involved in the first two games before they moved on to other projects. Now the second one. So I love certain games that have cut content in them, because a game in development is never A to B to C, it's probably A to D to Z to T to C eventually. And the Sonic 2 beta is an interesting one. So, bit of a background story behind this. So, the final game was released at the end of 1992, but this particular version was being showcased at a toy fair in New York in the summer of '92. And someone got the cartridge and stole it. And it didn't go online until '97, but it had a lot of differences. So this picture, for instance, is from a cut zone that you can't play, but was restored for the remastered versions on iPhone and Android and everything else, and also the Sonic Origins that came out last year. A Hidden Palace Zone. It also had different zone names and cut zones as well. So slightly dodgy names like Genocide City Zone, that was not going to be one that would last. Also Dust Hill Zone, Wood Zone, and a few others. And since like this beta was leaked, it turns out that Sonic 2 had a time travel element as well. So there's a reason why certain zones were called Emerald Hill and Hilltop Zone. They were meant to be past, present and future versions of this. So this gave me a great idea as to the cut content that was never to be seen for the public. And the same applies to the Sonic 3 prototype. So again, as I mentioned before, Sonic 3 was definitely a defining moment for me. And this was announced to be discovered on the 19th of November 2019, just before 2020. And this was kind of seen as the holy grail of one of the Sonic prototypes, because this had been showcased in a magazine in late '93, where a cartridge had been handed out to certain magazines. You'd open it and you'd see it. And it had differences. So you had like a Sonic 2 sprite there. He looks totally different. The score timer rings, that's in green. Knuckles looks totally different. And also had different music as well. Oddly enough, the music that's in this prototype is actually in the Sonic 3 version that's in the Sonic Origins release that you can play on modern systems. So it was a surreal thing, but it had like different level openings and much more. But again, it showed what could have been, really. It showed what could have been with Sonic 3. And again, it made me have that little nugget of, well, in the development of a game like Tomb Raider, especially in a era where game companies were kind of figuring out how 3D could work in a game, there was going to be a lot of cut content. So that was one of the aims I wanted to do for the book. And finally, I think it goes without saying, the story of it. So this is the original team, barring Toby and Mr. Boyd, Neil Boyd. I spoke to everyone here involved, and I just felt like there was a good story to tell. The struggles, the dynamics, the family feel at core design, the success that everyone kind of had. Nathan would tell me there'd be Ferraris and Aston Martins rolling up to Derby's core design offices a few months after the release of Tomb Raider 1. But of course the burnout as well, the burnout that Toby Gard and Paul Douglas, suffered, and it's why they left after the first game. So I felt like there was a story that hadn't really properly been told. So I just felt like, well, I have kind of the bones of something here, but of course real life always does get in the way, and I thought hopefully soon I'll be able to kind of like see, because there's not going to be a pandemic that's going to stop me or give me the extra time to do this. So of course in February 2020 a pandemic happened, and it was, I believe, the week after I got engaged to my wife that the pandemic happened. And I realised that because I was working from home, I was writing for a gaming site at the time, that I thought, well, this could be an opportunity to talk to the developers who are going to be at home, and I thought it could be an opportunity to talk to everyone on Zoom and Skype, and just kind of get like just almost like mine their knowledge of like what they remember of the time of Tomb Raider. A little animation. So, Tomb Raider. So the beginning was the research, really. So I did this in a few ways. So it was newspaper cutouts that I found from libraries. It was showcasing the advertising budget that was going into Tomb Raider. So something like this was an advertisement in one of the newspapers and one of the trade magazines at the time as well. And I just found this was interesting to put here because it's not really angled like a game teaser. It's more like a movie poster, because you have like the text like angled here. You have like all the review ratings here. You have obviously Lara, the main character, right there. And also Tomb Raider featuring Lara Croft. You've never seen the game before, like Sonic 3 featuring Sonic, Tails and Knuckles. It just wouldn't happen. But with Tomb Raider it worked. And that's kind of the marketing that Core Design were going for. So there was a lot of magazines at the time as well. So it could be a CVG, it could be Games Master again, official PlayStation magazine. And there were so many previews of Tomb Raider, just showcasing like how Lara would be controlled, how you could like use the weapons and everything else there. And I was just absorbing everything like a sponge, even before I'd written one word of the book. Another factor was the TV show as well. So one factor of discovering Tomb Raider 2 for me wasn't just the magazines, it was a TV show. The first episode I ever watched of Games Master was the last series, the first episode, and they were doing a race of Tomb Raider 2 at the Tibet level. And it was also where they first reviewed Final Fantasy VII and Mortal Kombat 4 as well. So I just remember that as clear as day. And of course, there were shows like Bad Influence as well on the other side of the channel. And they were just showcasing Tomb Raider and reviewing it. And I say this in the book, but they reviewed Tomb Raider, I believe, about 86, 87%. So they kind of liked it for the time, which is good. But of course, it was also watching shows of the era as well. So when I was writing this, like the bones of the chapters, I was trying to get into kind of like it was almost time traveling into the 90s. So YouTube was fantastic during this pandemic because there were some YouTubers who were doing streams of classic shows, and I was watching them all and just absorbing like a sponge, because I was thinking, well, these shows were broadcast during 94, 95, 96 when the game was being made. I wanted to get an idea and also could just kind of have a feel for what the TV shows were like. So it was shows like Beatles About, it was shows like You Bet, Stars in Your Eyes, Catchphrase, even I was watching episodes of EastEnders as well. So I could tell you the plot of 96, I'm not going to bore you with that, but I did watch a lot of episodes of that to get in the mindset. So of course, Tomb Raider 2 is an interesting one because the first idea of the book, I wasn't going to feature Tomb Raider 2 at all. And the plan was just to write a book about the first Tomb Raider game, and that was it. But when I was talking to everyone, like Gavin Rumry, the developer, Heather Gibson, the designer, and everyone else, I just realised that the same team, more or less, worked on the second game before they moved on. And I thought, I'm only writing half a story here, and I feel like it deserves the whole story to be told. So this was about 8 months in, and even though I had the book commissioned in March of 2020 and a deadline of January 2021, it wasn't the longest of times to work on a book like this, because I feel like if there wasn't a pandemic, it probably would have taken me 2 years, but I had almost about 10 months, and I decided to do Tomb Raider 2, I believe, like I say, about July, August time of 2020. But of course, there was also something else of Tomb Raider 2 that was a massive thing. And I also see this on TikToks and Instagram Reels as well. And that is, of course, a freezer. So if I just say a freezer, does anyone know what I mean from these two words? Yeah. So of course, I mean Winston the Butler. And if anyone isn't familiar, in Tomb Raider 2, when Lara's home, they expanded it where you could press a button in the kitchen and you could open the fridge door, and if you're a sadist, you can just lead Winston the Butler in, and after you've hit him a little bit and he's farted a little bit, Nathan McCree's sound, by the way, and then you jump and you can lock him in the freezer. Now that is something that's been remembered so much. When me and my wife were dating, I was saying about some ideas for this, and the first thing that she answered was, "Is that the game with the butler?" And there we are. So when I'm looking on TikTok and I look at gaming memories and PlayStation 1 memories, every single time I see this, I see Winston the Butler. So he's almost iconic in his own way. But as an aside as well, Winston the Butler is actually classed as an enemy, would you believe? So for some reason, what they've done, in order for him to follow Lara, they coded him to be an enemy with no weapons, no way of attacking, but it was the only way that they could make Winston follow Lara no matter where. So no matter where you could go, maybe if you left him, like say, in the kitchen and you ran to the maze in the corner of the Lara's home level, he would suddenly appear, like a haunting figure that he has been. And that was why, because the enemy respawned close to you, and that was Winston, so he was an unarmed enemy all this time. So that was obviously one of the reasons why I also decided to put Tomb Raider 2 into the book as well. So there were some milestones as well between March and handing it in January. So Christmas was out of the question. Me and my wife went to one of those Shepherd Hut cabins. I pretty much brought an iPad and was transcribing some of the interviews. She wasn't happy, but we worked it out, it's all fine. So the milestones were interviews on Zoom and Skype. So because of the pandemic, everyone was in a lockdown. So this meant that I was chatting to everyone involved, through hours and hours of Zoom and Skype calls, and they were happy to, and they were completely happy, and everyone was just like a real joy to chat to. I was also planning out the chapters as well with plenty of post-its that I've said there. So my office wall would be just full of these different chapters and where these certain quotes that I'd had from me Zoom and Skype chats into the post-it, and I'd be laying them out and I'd be cutting it and everything else, and then I'd transcribe it, which did take me a full month, and then I also just did the whole writing, which was the last 3 months. So it was almost like a kind of a game of Tetris. It was making sure which pieces fitted to which chapter, and of course it was playing both of the games. I'm still recovering from playing both of these games, I'll say now, even like 3 years on. I must have played both games into the hundreds. It was something else. But for a book like this, you have to. You have to go through every nook and cranny of the levels and everything else, because that way you'll be able to discover questions and queries when you're talking to the team on Zoom and Skype. And there were plenty of things, because there was a lot of cut content, and also one of the vehicles. So this is something I explain in the book, but when they were testing out the vehicles in Tomb Raider 2, the first one was the Skidoo in Tibet, but they didn't have a model for the actual snowmobile. So what they did instead is that they modeled the shape of a snowmobile, but they modeled it with Lara's textures. So it turned out that the actual steering wheel was her bum instead. So it was a dodgy little thing, but that's how they had to do it. That's how they had to test it out to make sure it worked. And then once it was done, they then went to the boat and everything else. So it was just little things like that I came across through these conversations, which was just amazing, really. It was just surreally how far we've come. So January 2021, so all gets handed in, and after a few edits and everything, it's all good. But there's a few things that happened. So fast forward towards the end of the year, the book is released, and we are at TR25. So it's a event in Derby. So the organizer, called Luke Earl, a great guy, he has been doing yearly events. It's almost like a Tomb Raider convention almost, where a lot of cosplayers and the original development team kind of come along and they chat about everything. And of course, there's me signing the books and staying on stage with Gavin, Heather, Pete, and Judith Gibbons, the voice of Lara from Tomb Raider 2 and 3. And it was an incredible time. Definitely one of the best days of my life. But it just kind of showed just how much that people wanted to read about this story, really. They wanted to find out, really, just how certain levels came to be. So, there are some scrapped ideas, though. So like I say, the original plan after I decided to do Tomb Raider 2 was to do it in volumes. So there'd be Volume 1, Tomb Raider 1, Volume 2, Tomb Raider 2, and so on and so on. But this goes back to the mantra of wanting to tell the story of the original team. And this is where it kind of ends at Tomb Raider 2. So I decided just to scrap that and just do a making of Tomb Raider with the original team, and it ends when they move on to Tomb Raider 3. Vicky Arnold. Now, this is an interesting one. So Vicky Arnold was essentially the big voice of Lara in the first 3 games. So her and the PR manager at Core Design at the time, Susie Hamilton, they were responsible for a lot of the script and the story of Lara Croft. And even though, excuse me, Susie Hamilton features heavily in the book, Vicky Arnold doesn't, because no one knows where she is at all. So the original story goes is she worked on Tomb Raider 3, and in 1999 she decided that she'd had enough. She moved on from Core Design, and the last thing that anyone knows, she went to Australia to be a diving instructor, and that's all that anyone knows. And I spent a lot of 2020 just trying to find out if Vicky Arnold even existed, because I got to the point after so many hours and days of research, wondering whether Vicky Arnold was real. I was assured that she was indeed real, but yeah, it was just one of those things where I just couldn't find her. But her imprint is everywhere in the book because everyone talks about it. Everyone talks about why she decided to write Lara as she did with Susie. It's totally interesting. The last thing I heard is that she was at one of the talks celebrating the 20th anniversary of Tomb Raider. But again, I would love to talk to her and just kind of see like what she thinks about the franchise like all these years on. 10th anniversary edition. So this is an intriguing one. So Core Design released a game called The Angel of Darkness in 2003. 20 years in May this will be. And this was their move to the PlayStation 2 console. So personally, I enjoyed Angel of Darkness, a great game, but it was buggy as anything. It didn't really work. And unfortunately, it led for the IP to be taken from Core Design to Crystal Dynamics, which is how we got Tomb Raider Legend, Anniversary, and so on. But to be fair, I do believe that if Angel of Darkness was released in this day and age, I think it would have gone the way of Cyberpunk. So when Cyberpunk got released, that was also a buggy mess. Lots of memes, lots of videos, lots of compilations of cars randomly flying off into the distance on fire for no reason. But I believe Angel of Darkness, if it was released around the same time, there would have been apologies, there would have been DLC packs, bug fixes, refunds, and I think we would have gotten the game that would have been envisaged all those years ago. So the 10th anniversary edition was going to be Core Design's almost reprieve. They were going to remake the very first Tomb Raider in 2006. Nathan was going to come back to compose. There was going to be a 2-player mode. Every level was going to be redesigned. And they were also going to do a new final boss because, as Gavin explains to me in the book, they were never really happy with Natla as the final boss at the end because they were just on a deadline. They had to get the game done for October 96. And unfortunately, the bosses like Natla suffered. But again, they were halfway through it. And it was a strange thing because when I was writing the book, a build of the game actually came out thanks to the community. And I thought, well, this is going to be a fantastic chapter to write about because we could talk about how certain members from the original team were working on this and have their reactions to the game that we can play. So I did set up a call with Gavin because he was in charge of this project. And it was a great little chat. I got to work on a chapter. I was 3 words in and I thought, no, this doesn't work. because it goes back to the story of the original team, and also myself time traveling after watching many Beatles abouts and EastEnders and everything. It just made me feel like if you're going to talk about the original game, it's going to be a bit jarring to suddenly go forward 10 years and then go back just to when they were demoing the original game at E3 in '96. It wouldn't have made sense. So that was scrapped. But it's such an interesting build to play, because even when the IP was taken away from Core Design, they tried to angle it as Indiana Jones game, would you believe? But that's a whole other story. Expansion packs. So this is almost like a lost art now. I think this is almost like today's equivalent of DLC, really. So expansion packs is where on the PC you will be able to play games like Unfinished Business with Tomb Raider 1. It was 4 extra levels just after she escaped the Pyramid. Tomb Raider 2 had one called the Golden Mask, and Tomb Raider 3 had one called the Lost Artifact, where it had the 5th artifact, and you would go to Scotland and certain levels as well. Fantastic games, and I was tempted to write about the first 2, but again, it wasn't developed by the original team. And it was this focus that made me feel like always go on like the North Star of the original team, that main thing. Because if I'm suddenly going about expansion packs, and especially when, for instance, Golden Mask was released in '99, way after the original team were working on certain things for the PS2, it wouldn't have made sense. And Tomb Raider 3, well, in the book, it explains the original team's idea for what the third game would have been. It would have been on the PlayStation 2. But unfortunately, as Ian Livingstone says in the book as well, the shareholders wanted a Tomb Raider game out every single year, which is why we got Tomb Raider 4 and 5 and eventually Angel of Darkness. So even though there is a mention of the intentions of what the third game was going to be, I thought, let's just leave it there. But there is something else from that, which I'll go later on. So this is something that I was talking to Heather about at the TR25 event. And it was such a great day, because we were signing books, we were being asked questions about certain things. Heather just was almost kind of amazed that she was being asked all these questions like 25 years on at the time. But on the cafe, like after the presentation, she kind of like just turned to me and said, "You know what, Daryl? I think after 25 years, I feel like I've just talked about it so much now that I just feel like I'd be repeating myself." And she feels like, and she said to me, it would be a good note to end on for 25 years and to pass the series and the stories on to the next generation. And I just thought it was a really like nice thing, really, the fact that, you know, it was something that she loved, but she's moved on from it now. She has a family, we all have a family, and it's just a great thing just for something to end on. But that doesn't stop like people from the community or any of us kind of like playing the games again. I just thought it was a really nice thing. So the future. So now that the book's out and everything, and we're just about approaching the 27th anniversary, I kind of wanted to say about where does Tomb Raider stand in 2023. So I believe in preservation. So game preservation is such an important thing. But playing Tomb Raider, especially the early games, is such a challenge, because if you have a PS5 right now, or even an Xbox, or even if you try to play one of the original games on a PC, it's a bit of a headache, and you can't even play them. The only way you can do it is by getting an original PlayStation 1 console, a PS2 because it has backwards compatibility, or going to the online store on the PS3 and buying it straight away. And you can also do it on the Vita as well. But then you've also got the PC and the Steam Deck too. But I feel like it's such a shame with this, because when you kind of like see all these other franchises, like say like Resident Evil and even Crash Bandicoot, and having all these kind of like this rejuvenation of the franchises, but Tomb Raider unfortunately has just been left to the wayside. And don't get me wrong, the reboots are fantastic. I've enjoyed every game. But there's just something about playing the original game and having Winston follow you and looking at him in the freezer in 2023. There's something special about that still. But decompilation is an interesting point, really, because it's only like a topic that's kind of come into focus in the last couple of years. So if anyone's not aware, decompilations are where certain community members have gone into the game and they've reverse engineered the game to work on modern systems. So with Tomb Raider, you can now play it in native widescreen, you can enable certain settings, You can even have, like, say, the health bars for the enemies even on the bottom left screen as well. So I'll just have this, I'll be able to pass this. So this is my Steam Deck. We can just pass it to you. There you go. So right now on there in the Steam Deck is the original Tomb Raider, in widescreen, everything there. If you downloaded the Tomb Raider game right now on your PC, it would still be running in MS-DOS. And on a machine like Windows 11, sometimes it just doesn't understand what this is with MS-DOS. If anyone's got like a 4K screen, I feel your pain because I tried it at the beginning. It crashes straight away. It doesn't work well. If you look at Tomb Raider 3, for some reason there's a texture bug where Lara's face is plastered across the trees, the enemies, the monkeys, everything. But for some reason, Crystal Dynamics hasn't really kind of gone into these and fixed them. But with the compilations, it's not only just for the first game, but it's the second game as well. There's Me at Christmas, just having a little beer, but also playing Venice in widescreen there as well. The music's there, everything's great. And even the third game, that was only a recent release, and that came out just a few months ago. But the whole game, and also the expansion packs, is playable on the PC and the Steam Deck. And it's thanks to the community that we're seeing this game preservation be held, which is a fantastic thing. But it goes back to my point of game preservation and why I believe it's so important. So for instance, tomorrow we've got Resident Evil 4, the remake, coming out. We've also got from last week, if anyone's got the PS Plus Premium subscription on the PS5, you can now play Ridge Racer 4, which is a game that released in '99, fantastic racing game, but Sony just kind of like shadow dropped it on the PS5 and you can play Ridge Racer 4. But it's unfortunate really because you can't really just pop your PS1 disc into a PS5 and play a game. Unfortunately, you're beholden to Sony's way of a PS Premium service, and it's a bit of a shame. But it also goes to Nintendo's way as well. So with the Wii U and the 3DS stores, they close just next week. So if anyone has a Wii U or 3DS, have only got, you know, just a few days to purchase a few games before it closes forever, and that's it. And which is a massive shame because you'll be missing out on certain games that, well, depending on Nintendo's have a feeling on certain weeks, you won't be able to play them again. Because if anyone remembers the Mario All-Stars collection on Switch a few years ago, it was a collection where you could play Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, and Mario Galaxy. And then they took them away about 6 months later. So it just kind of goes back to how game preservation is not only just that needs to be preserved for certain games, but also that it has to be almost kind of like preserved for future generations. But it also goes into other things as well. So Sonic Origins Plus, that was just announced today. A game released last year, which was the first time where Sonic 3 was remastered, widescreen, and you could play all the games as intended, apart from certain music choices from Michael Jackson. But the latest release, introduces new characters, so you can play as Amy Rose in all 3 games now, it seems, alongside Knuckles. There's also Game Gear games you can then play on this collection as well. That's going to be released on June 23rd. But this goes back to how re-releases, remasters is such like a profitable thing for a company. Because again, you go back to franchises like Resident Evil or even Crash Bandicoot again, about how these companies kind of recognize how nostalgia works so well and how game preservation is so important for something like Tomb Raider. However, we have seen Tomb Raider in different formats. We've got a Netflix show coming up with Hayley Atwell playing Lara Croft. We've got the Tomb Raider experience in London. I've been through that. It hurt my knees to hell, but as I was diving and going down slides, but there was like an awareness of how Tomb Raider is. And without actually going slightly sad on this note, I mean, again, life is short with this because during the making of the book, Troy Horton, he was the producer on the first few games. I was chatting to him. It was a fantastic time. He was going to be going to the Tomb Raider 2R25 event. And unfortunately, suddenly, he died in August of 2021 suddenly. And it was just such a shame. But again, it goes back to the fact that he is in that book. He is now immortalized with his stories and the funny stories that he would buy pizza at 2 a.m. for the team just so they could get the bugs ironed out of Tomb Raider 2. And I feel like it's also why preservation of talking to the team and everything is so important, because none of us are going to be lasting on this earth for long. So why not have a preservation and tell the story that should be told to everyone who has an interest in the series? And also the community. So that's at TR25. The community is just incredible. You have people like Tomb of Ash, who is a great curator of the Tomb Raider series. Steve War, who does fantastic retrospectives on Tomb Raider. He's in progress of doing the Tomb Raider 2013 game. The Vault podcast, Stella, who hosts a lot of walkthroughs and screenshots, who saved my bacon a lot during the pandemic when I forgot how to do the Opera House in Tomb Raider 2. And also Maggie Lay, who was a recent Let's Player, but is replaying every single game, but fantastic. But she's also big on TikTok, so sometimes if you're scrolling through Tomb Raider things, you'll most likely see her like just accidentally killing Lara through a certain pit that she's missed. But it just goes back to how Tomb Raider is just an ever-present and jumping across different social platforms in this day and age. And Raidercast is also another podcast where it's interviewed like certain things, and I think as recent as used the ChatGPT service to write up a Lara Croft story, which is just bizarre. But I encourage you to have a look at that because it is something else. So the other things is also something else with TR27. So this is going to be an event that's going to be held in October, and I'm going to be hosting a debrief with the developers at TR27, 14th October. It's going to be chatting with a few people who were involved in the development of Tomb Raider 3, and this is really going to be seen as an epilogue really to the book. Because with Tomb Raider 3, because a whole new team was assigned to this, they had all these huge ideas for Tomb Raider 3. It was going to be multiple routes you could use to finish levels. There was going to be a high-res mode, so from 320 to 480p for the PS1. There was even going to be a knife that Lara could use to kind of like for puzzles, or could like dig out certain artifacts or cut ropes for certain traps. But they ran out of time. They had to get it done. Again, they're beholden by the shareholders. But this debrief is going to be talking to them about what they wanted to do with it, what they would have done with it, and what they feel and what they feel about the game now, like 25 years on. So again, that's October 2023. Now, I'm always asked about, is there going to be a book 2? Am I writing a book about Tomb Raider 4, 5 Chronicles? And I'm not, but there is a book 2 that's in progress, and it is due for release early next year. I finished it. It's in the editing process right now. It's not about a game per se. It's more about the topic of a lost art really of games. But you could also say that certain games in this day and age have also made it its own trope, its own focus, which is an intriguing thing. So this is full of interviews, full of insights into many games about a certain topic, but it is early 2024, and yet again, it is not Tomb Raider related. So there we go. And on that note, I've ended. Short and sweet, and there we go, the end.
Right, so really cool stuff.
Thank you.
I teach like retro programming and stuff like that. So how deep do you go into actually technical details of programming and development? Do you actually go into, do you get comments on people on how these things were developed, which platform, or what type of things?
Yes. So Paul Douglas had made the first engine of Tomb Raider, and he made the level designer as well, and Gavin Rummery also helped with this. And they go into detail as to how the two games are kind of like built on a grid system, where you would essentially, with Lara, you'd walk to a certain place and a trigger would happen where music would play or an enemy would spawn. And we do get into detail with that, but I feel like the challenge with this is to kind of explain it in ways that anyone can understand it. If I just have like extracts of certain Visual Basic code or C++ code, some people might get lost. So, yeah. But yeah, there is a heap of detail from Paul and Gavin definitely about how they made the engines with it all.
Cool. Yeah, you spoke also about like preservation and stuff, and I completely agree. But every time I come here to the center, or every time that I turn on why do you think like you talk about Steam Deck, you talk about, I don't know, emulators, simulators, but I remember there's always something like about a CRT, kind of, it's almost like this environment around the game.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, do you think modern technology is able to replicate that thing that we had in the past, where you have like these pixels kind of blended and making all this? I always thought that there is this environment where the technology at the time added to it. So what do you think? Do you think we are able to replicate what my old MS-DOS Lara Croft was, or do you think, is there any way that we can actually replicate those things around the game and not only the pixels in this kind of LCD or LED screens today?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, there's so many kind of remasters now where they offer like CRT filters, and they actually kind of like, I mean, they don't just have like an overlay of a CRT
and your shader,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they try to kind of like emulate, like, to the best of their ability, like how it looked on a CRT. And it's a good point, actually, kind of like how like people come around to different houses, like their friends, and look at games and go, oh, I really want to get that game, that looks great. Or they'll help people. And I feel like it's still there, but just in a different way. I mean, like take Twitch, for instance, and live streams, like people kind of like go into like certain live streams and chat away and things. And it's a great little thing. But yeah, with CRTs, I mean, especially with the decompilation of a Steam Deck and the PC, they have really tried to not only make it work on modern systems, but make sure that the frame rate of 30 frames is there. Because I think I have played Tomb Raider 1 in 60 frames and it doesn't work at all.
It's just weird.
Yeah, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. But again, actually, as an aside to that, I mean, because with PAL games, they were slower than American games, and especially Sonic. So when I first played a Sonic game, an American version, for the first time, and it was faster, it blew my mind because it was the way it was meant to be played. But again, it goes back to that game preservation of like, it's the sound and the look of what holds the memory, I think. And I feel like developers are definitely wising up to the fact that that is important in this day and age.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry, just going back to the subject of the modern reproductions, the emulations, the ports to modern systems. Obviously, they put in things like, widescreens, accessibility features. Have the team ever spoken about whether they're tempted to improve on the original? All the ideas that got filed away but never quite made it in. Have they snuck any of those in and not told anyone about them? Or are they dedicated to just trying to get the original experience, I suppose?
So you mean with decompilations, with the community?
More the official releases.
Yeah, sure. I've heard that they are all trying, because I remember like a few years ago where people really kind of like wanting to see. I remember so many YouTube videos of like, here is Tomb Raider in 4K, here it is in 8K, here it is on a widescreen monitor, like almost like you were on a plane. But I feel like that's reversing now, because I think the developers definitely have said to me anyway that they want to kind of like reproduce that feeling that you've had all those years ago on a CRT, because it is difficult. I mean, like take for instance like light gun games like Time Crisis and Point Blank. It's so hard to control those games with an LCD. It's so hard now. But there are developers now who are making sure that can work. I think House of the Dead remake on Switch, I think that works really well. But it's just an example of just how well that developers are starting to care that it's not just getting the game working, it's making sure that the game feels like it did when it first released as well. So yeah, they are trying.
Yeah, we were talking about this at work here at the Centre for Computer History. We were talking about this, how it is strange that the first 3 PlayStation games, like, they just aren't available now. Yeah, like you said, it's a chore if you want to play. Or you've got to emulate them, you've got to go to shady areas, you've got to download ROMs, or all that, ISOs, all that jazz. And we were asking them, why was this the case? And I don't know. What do you think? The idea that Tomb Raider was 2 things. There was a game series and there was Lara Croft, the first ever virtual celebrity, a megastar in its own right.
Yeah.
And that hasn't really gone away. Lara Croft's been a constant. So, I don't know, do you think maybe the Lara Croft being constant has kind of steered people away? So they don't have that. People don't feel a need for those original ones. There's always been Lara Croft, there's always been Lara Croft games. I don't know, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, I think with core design and their marketing in the beginning, they weren't marketing the game, they were marketing Lara Croft, And I feel like, I always remember this advert of Lucasade, of Lara's Aid. I just remember that of like in 98, 99, and there was rumors about a movie. So the whole thing was about Lara Croft. And I think it goes back to the at the advert that I showed, Tomb Raider featuring Lara Croft. So it was always about her. But yeah, it is like an interesting one, because all these years on, I feel like we just remember like the characters and how they kind of like made us feel, or how they made us laugh as well. Because it's like I was saying to yourself before, like I feel like with Lara, definitely in the first few games, it had this kind of like James Bondy and Indiana Jones quip comedy that I feel like has been missed in the last few years. And I feel like it's taking itself too seriously. When there's a game that says she has to become the Tomb Raider, I feel like that's just too much. It's a bit too serious. Whereas you've got Lara in the beginning, locking butlers in a freezer and just doing quips like when someone's flown off a bell in London. So yeah, I just feel like Lara has just, I think she stood the test of time. But I just feel like it's things like the book where it has to kind of like show why the developers chose Lara as they did, and why Lara kind of lasts all these years on as well.
All right, any more? No? In that case, another round of applause. Daryl Baxter, thanks.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.